Have you ever noticed that the longer somebody has been in personal development, they tend to have more sophisticated language to justify why they can't do something. And man, this is my personal pet peeve. And you better believe when a client or a member brings up something as a reason why they can't, and they use some sort of word like, I'm not coherent, or I don't have capacity, I call that shit out, because these are not terms to be weaponized nor to enable an I can't orientation to our own potential, So go with me. There's this moment where we all have like this inner story about ourselves, and we might rehearse that story so many times that our body believes it, our mind believes it. And this is how you know it's like an embodied story, by the way. We might call it limiting belief or whatever, because you don't see it as a limiting belief. You see it and you as how it is. That's how you know that it's innerved, it's embodied. But I love these moments with clients where the story that they've been telling themselves over time, it starts to fall apart in the face of something they cannot argue with. Because we don't realize how much of our identity is simply based on narrative, on story. And this isn't, like I said, loose thoughts, or these are structured explanations, like even like evidence and proof for why we are the way we are, why certain things have or haven't happened, what's available to us in moving forward. And we all have them. And over time, these explanations, they really start to feel like reality itself. They become the reference point for like every decision, every hesitation, every conclusion about what's actually possible. I'll give you an example. We had a client recently come to us who is beginning to understand the skins, which is our somatic framework. You can also check out more about the skins, somatic skins, in our new release, the Somatic Skins, or even taking our Somatic Skins free quiz. Both of those links are in the description. But anyways, this client said something that on the surface, it sounded honest and self-aware. And she said, oh man, it's really hard to hear that this isn't just about mindset. I guess it's about capacity. And I just don't have any capacity. And then she moved exactly where people always move next. She started telling us about who she's been and why she doesn't have any evidence for capacity. She walked us through the last 20 years of her life, the patterns that she's seen, the way that she's shown up, the things that have played out the way they have, and this like really defeating kind of conclusion that, oh, well, it explains it. Just I'm not somebody with capacity. And you could hear the structure of it. It wasn't random. It was a well-built case. She has told this story before, one that's been reinforced over time, refined through repetition, and used really to explain to herself both her past and her limitations in the present, and really her trajectory of what she really believes she's capable of moving forward. What stood out wasn't just what she was saying. I'm always paying attention to how it's being said too. I'm a body woman. And it was how the word capacity was being experienced through her body, because it was already being turned into something fixed, something personal, something that defined the edges of what she could and couldn't do. And so you could feel when she said it, it carried weight, like this density. It just justified it. And this was her embodiment. Ugh. It protected it. It closed the loop, even of like ownership of being more fiercely creative in creating something new for herself. And in that moment, it would have been really easy to engage with her at that level of story, to meet her inside that narrative and, try to reshape it, to soften it, or, offer her a different way of thinking about herself. But we didn't do that. We interrupted her calmly, directly. and said something that most people rarely hear in these kinds of conversations. Story not needed. Story not needed. And the reason that we could say that with certainty is because we had already worked with her. We had taken her through the Oracle's Edge, which is our full diagnostic process where we get direct observation of how somebody actually functions. You think that the quiz opens up the conversation about this, but the Oracle's Edge is your next step to take this work different. It's where we get our eyes, our ears on you. We get to watch how you move, how you talk, how you answer, and it gives us incredible precision into your subconscious and conscious patterning. We look at how you move, how you breathe, how your attention organizes, how your patterns show up both consciously, as I said, and subconsciously, and where your blind spots live. We identify what we call your exact invisible edges, the places where change happens quickly because your system is already really close. So we did that with her. We had already done that with this particular member. We had also taken her through the Incendium, our 10-week accelerator. We had seen her under different conditions, in different states of being, across different interactions, different moods, different days. So all that to say, we weren't guessing. We had already gathered the information. So when she said, I don't have capacity, it didn't register as insight. It registered as a very cute and endearing mismatch. Because capacity, it isn't determined by how you feel about yourself on a day when things are heavy or unclear. It isn't defined by your story or, the narrative that you construct about your past. Capacity shows up in what your system can actually do, and that's not made up. It shows up in behavior. It shows up in repeatable patterns that we can name and list. It shows up in what holds under pressure, and it's measurable. That should be really freaking good news because that's where everything shifted, and it's what shifted for her in that moment. So instead of engaging with her story, we brought her back to the facts. Facts over feeling state. We reminded her of what we had already seen. The moments where her structure held when it typically wouldn't have. The moments when her breath stayed steady and she was well resourced instead of tightening. The moments where her attention remained stable and focused instead of being kind of scattered and apologetic all over the place. We had specific, observable, undeniable data points like remember when, that reflected what her system was capable of when it was aligned. We reminded her of real data points of capacity. And so you could see the shift in that reminder happen in real time. She paused, she leaned back slightly, and there was this quiet moment where the narrative that had her by the throat, it just lost its grip because it was being confronted by something more solid than just momentary interpretation. And she said, oh yeah, that's true. Those are the facts. Funny that. And that moment, it really mattered to her. It matters to all of us more than we realize because it's incredibly rare for someone to be brought out of their story so cleanly without having to fight it or redefine it or defend it in any way. It just dropped. When the reference point changes from narrative and then how we feel to evidence, something within us opens up immediately. There's space, there's clarity, there's movement, there's real power. What became obvious in that moment is something that we see all the time. The mind is going to run its patterns. It will default to what's familiar, and that it's going to show up in the body. It will try to protect you from stepping into something that feels uncertain or exposes you in some way. And so it wants to reinforce a version of you that feels known and contained. And it's the mind, and therefore the way it's innerved in the body, it's really convincing. It uses your own history, your own language, your own experiences. It recrafts even your own memories to fit that narrative. And it builds a case that feels airtight from the inside. But this is why I love capacity work or embodiment work. That story, it doesn't hold up. When you put it next to what actually is happening, that's where reality meets this work in a really profound, undeniable way. Once you can see in real time that your story isn't the final authority, you can start orienting around something far more reliable. You can start looking at what your body is actually doing, how your patterns are expressing, where your system holds or breaks under different conditions. And from there, the conversation changes when it comes to what you're capable of. Because it moves away from trying to feel a certain way about yourself and into training your ability to express what's already there as more true. It becomes about whether you can carry something through your system cleanly and let it exist in the world as measurable truth, whether you can stay organized under pressure, whether your behavior reflects what you're actually capable of instead of what your story or your default patterns say about you. And that's a really different standard. It's a liberating one. It's also a confronting one because it gives you something real to work with. You actually have to look in the mirror and look at reality and bridge that with what is actually true in your body and your system. If you have ever caught yourself where you work with clients and you've caught them saying some version of that's just who I am, or I've always been this way, it's really worth questioning. Where did that come from? And whether it's actually supported by anything measurable. Now, you'll still have evidence and data because your mind is as brilliant as you are, but it's worth looking at whether that's simply a story that's been repeated enough times that it feels true. And what would it mean for you to step outside of that loop? What would it mean to admit where, okay, maybe that's true for now, but how can I train differently? How do I develop? How do I create myself and therefore my life differently such that I shape the story and it's backed up by evidence in the tangible or material world? You'll gain access in that shift, you'll gain access to change. And that change is exactly what we train inside the Prestige. This is our Applied Somatics Academy, which means that we're not asking you to think differently or feel differently about yourself and then just kind of randomly hope that that translates into your life. We work directly with how your system is currently functioning. We coach the mind through the body so that your structure, your breath, your attention can actually support the way that you want to show up, especially in moments that matter. As I mentioned before with this client, the Oracle's Edge is a part of that process. It gives you a clear, grounded view of how you operate, where your patterns live, and where your fastest growth is available. From there, the work that we build out, the protocol of training for you, becomes precise, practical, measurable. This is not make-believe. So if you're ready to stop, trying to work on your story and relaying the same story and start working with something real and tangible, even if it is also expansive in potential, join us for a season within the Prestige, because I would just love for you to experience the potency of this work for yourself and watch what happens. If you made it this far, that says something. Thank you so much for hanging out with me a little bit. Do consider liking and subscribing. It helps the channel out and it helps us be more connected. Until next time.